I drove 8 hours to celebrate my sister's engagement. After I gifted $7,600 for the ring, her fiancé looked me up and down and proclaimed, "Oh, you showed up? We miraculously have a random nobody here." I just smiled, walked out. And that night, I decided to cut them off forever. I, 31M, never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. Sometimes the people you love most are the ones who hurt you deepest. My sister and I grew up close. Really close. After our parents died in a car accident when I was 23 and she was 19, we only had each other. I worked 2 jobs to put her through college while finishing my own degree at night. When she graduated and landed her dream job as a marketing coordinator, I was the proudest big brother alive. 3 months ago, she called me practically screaming with excitement. She was engaged. Her boyfriend of 2 years had finally proposed, and she was over the moon. I genuinely felt happy for her. She'd been through some rough relationships before this guy, and hearing that joy in her voice made everything worth it. She gushed about the proposal, how romantic it was, how perfect the ring looked on her finger. Then came the pause, the one that told me something was coming. She mentioned they were having trouble affording the ring he'd picked out. It was exactly what she wanted, but they were about $3,000 short after the down payment. I didn't even hesitate. I told her I'd cover it. She tried to protest, saying it was too much, but I shut that down immediately. Family takes care of family. That's how we'd always done things. I transferred the money that same day, but that wasn't enough. When she mentioned the ring was actually more expensive than they'd initially calculated, I sent another $1,500. Then came the wedding band that would complete the set. Another $2,000. Before I knew it, I'd contributed $7,600 to her engagement ring situation. Did it hurt my savings? Absolutely. Did I care? Not one bit. This was my little sister's happiness we were talking about. The same girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms when we were kids. The same girl who cheered louder than anyone at my college graduation. Money meant nothing compared to seeing her smile. When she invited me to their engagement party, I immediately requested time off work. The party was 8 hours away in the city where she lived with her fiancé. I'd met him briefly a few times during holidays, but we'd never really connected. He seemed nice enough, though a bit reserved around me. I figured it was just the normal awkwardness of dating someone's protective older brother. I should mention that my sister and I look nothing alike. She got the tall, blonde, conventionally attractive genes. I got the shorter, stockier, decidedly average genes. Growing up, people often didn't believe we were related. It never bothered me much, but it always seemed to make her uncomfortable when people pointed it out. The drive to the party gave me time to think about everything. I was genuinely excited to celebrate with them, meet their friends, and see my sister in her element. I'd even bought a new shirt for the occasion and stopped at a fancy gift shop to pick up an expensive bottle of champagne for the happy couple. I arrived at the venue right on time. It was a beautiful upscale restaurant with a private dining room. Through the windows, I could see about 30 people mingling, laughing, and having a great time. My sister looked absolutely radiant in a flowing blue dress, showing off her ring to anyone who would look. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The moment I stepped through the door, the room seemed to shift. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but there was definitely a change in energy. I scanned the room for my sister and found her near the bar with her fiancé. They were talking to another couple, but she caught sight of me almost immediately. Her face lit up with what looked like genuine happiness, and she started walking toward me. But before she could reach me, her fiancé stepped directly into my path. He looked me up and down slowly, deliberately. There was something in his expression that made my stomach clench. It wasn't surprise or even mild annoyance. It was something closer to disgust. Then he spoke loud enough for half the room to hear. He proclaimed with theatrical surprise that I had actually showed up and that they now miraculously had a random nobody at their party. The words hit me like a physical blow. The room went dead silent. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward us. I felt my face burning with humiliation, but I kept my expression neutral. My sister stood frozen behind him, her mouth slightly open in shock. For a moment, I considered responding. I thought about mentioning the $7,600. I thought about reminding him that this random nobody had made his perfect proposal possible. I thought about asking him exactly who he thought had been supporting his fiancée through college while he was nowhere to be found. Instead, I smiled. Not a fake smile or a bitter smile, just a calm, knowing smile. I looked him directly in the eyes and nodded slightly, as if he'd just confirmed something I'd suspected all along. Then I turned around and walked out. I heard my sister call my name as I reached the door, but I didn't turn back. The drive home was a blur of anger, hurt, and crystal clear realization. This wasn't just about her fiancé being a jerk. This was about my sister standing there and saying nothing. Not one word in my defense. Not even an awkward laugh to diffuse the situation. Just silence. By the time I reached my apartment 8 hours later, I'd made my decision. I was done. Not just with him, but with both of them. The calls started the next morning. First from my sister, then from her fiancé. I let them all go to voicemail. She tried texting, saying they needed to talk, that there had been a misunderstanding, that her fiancé had been drinking and didn't mean what he said. I finally listened to the voicemails 3 days later. My sister sounded confused and hurt, asking why I'd left so suddenly and begging me to call her back. Her fiancé's message was different. He was clearly trying to do damage control, claiming he'd been joking and didn't realize I was so sensitive. Sensitive. That word stuck with me. I'd driven 8 hours to celebrate their happiness. I'd emptied a significant chunk of my savings to pay for their dream ring. And when he publicly humiliated me, I was being sensitive for not finding it funny. I didn't call back. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since the engagement party, and the messages have intensified. My sister has progressed from confused to frantic to angry. She's alternating between begging me to forgive them and demanding to know why I'm being so dramatic over a simple joke. Yesterday, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I almost didn't answer the door, but I could hear her crying in the hallway. When I finally opened it, she looked terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her usually perfect hair was a mess, and she seemed to have lost weight. She pushed past me into my living room and immediately started talking. She was sorry, she said. Her fiancé was sorry. It was supposed to be funny. He was nervous about meeting more of her family and made a stupid joke. She couldn't understand why I was throwing away our entire relationship over one thoughtless comment. I let her finish before I responded. Then I asked her a simple question. What exactly did she think was funny about calling me a random nobody at her engagement party? She stumbled over her answer, saying it wasn't meant to sound as harsh as it came out. He was just surprised I'd made the drive. They hadn't been sure I was actually coming because I hadn't confirmed exactly when I'd arrive. I reminded her that I'd literally texted her from the road 2 hours before the party to let her know my estimated arrival time. She went quiet for a moment, then tried a different approach. She said her fiancé came from a family where everyone roasted each other constantly. It was just his humor style, and I was taking it too personally. That's when I asked the question that had been burning in my mind for 2 weeks. Why didn't she say anything? If it was just a misunderstanding or a joke gone wrong, why didn't she speak up in the moment? Why did she let me walk out of that room feeling like a fool? She started crying again, saying she'd been in shock and didn't know how to react. Everything happened so fast, and she was trying to process what was happening. She insisted she hadn't meant to hurt me by staying silent. I told her about the money then. All $7,600 of it. Her face went white as I laid out every transfer, every conversation where she'd mentioned needing help, every time I'd willingly contributed to making her dream ring a reality. She tried to interrupt, saying she'd never asked me to pay for so much, but I kept talking. I explained how it felt to drive 8 hours to celebrate her happiness, only to be treated like an unwelcome intruder by the man whose proposal I'd essentially funded. How it felt to watch her stand there in silence while he humiliated me in front of 30 people. By the end of our conversation, we were both crying. She begged me not to cut her off, promising things would be different. She swore her fiancé would apologize properly and that nothing like this would ever happen again. But I'd already made my decision. I told her I loved her, but I couldn't be part of a dynamic where I was expected to provide support and then accept disrespect with a smile. If she wanted to marry someone who thought it was appropriate to treat her family that way, that was her choice. But I wouldn't be sticking around to see how it played out. She left that day more upset than when she'd arrived. Update 2. The wedding is in 6 weeks, and my sister has officially entered panic mode. She's called every mutual friend we have, trying to get them to intervene. 3 of our cousins have reached out, saying she's desperate to reconcile before the big day. Apparently, her fiancé's family is asking questions about why her brother won't be at the wedding. She's been telling people I'm sick, but it's getting harder to maintain that story as the date approaches. 2 days ago, Her fiancé finally called me directly. His tone was completely different from his previous voicemail. This time, he was practically pleading. He admitted he'd messed up badly and asked if we could meet somewhere to talk it out man to man. I agreed, mostly because I was curious to see how he'd handle the conversation. We met at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our cities. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, which was a stark contrast to his confident performance at the engagement party. He started by apologizing, saying he'd been drinking and trying to impress some of his friends who were at the party. He claimed he had no idea I'd contributed money to the ring and felt terrible about the whole situation. I asked him why he thought it was appropriate to mock my sister's family regardless of who paid for what. His answer was revealing. He said he'd grown up in a house where his mother was constantly criticized by his father's family, and he'd learned that sometimes offense was the best defense. He was worried about being judged by my sister's family, so he decided to strike first. It was an honest answer, but not one that excused his behavior. I told him I appreciated his candor, but his insecurity had damaged something that couldn't be easily repaired. He asked what it would take for me to attend the wedding. I was quiet for a long moment, considering his question. Finally, I told him it wasn't about the wedding anymore. It was about trust. I trusted that my sister would have my back when it mattered, and she didn't. I trusted that the person she chose to marry would treat her family with basic respect, and he didn't. He asked if there was anything he could do to make amends. I suggested he start by being honest with his own family about why I wouldn't be attending the wedding, instead of letting my sister make up stories about illness. He agreed immediately, which surprised me. Our conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, and by the end, I had a better understanding of who he was. He wasn't evil or malicious, just deeply insecure and immature. Unfortunately, understanding someone's motivations doesn't automatically forgive their actions. When I got home that evening, I found a package on my doorstep. Inside was a cashier's check for $7,600 and a handwritten letter from my sister. The letter was 5 pages long, detailing every memory she had of me protecting her, supporting her, and sacrificing for her happiness. She wrote about how guilty she felt for taking my money and then allowing me to be treated so poorly. She promised to pay me back every cent if that's what it would take to repair our relationship. But the money was never really the issue. It was about respect, dignity, and loyalty. It was about the fact that when push came to shove, she chose her comfort over my dignity. Update 3. The wedding was last Saturday. I didn't attend. I spent the day hiking alone, trying to process everything that had happened over the past few months. My phone was buzzing constantly with messages from family members and mutual friends sharing photos and updates from the ceremony. From the pictures, it looked beautiful. My sister was radiant, her husband looked happy, and everyone seemed to have a wonderful time. Part of me felt sad that I'd missed such an important day in her life, but a larger part of me felt at peace with my decision. Sunday morning, I woke up to a voicemail from my sister. She was clearly emotional, probably still coming down from the wedding high. She said the day had felt incomplete without me there, that she'd kept looking for me in the crowd during the ceremony. She mentioned that her husband had kept his promise. When people asked about my absence, he'd told them honestly that he'd behaved poorly toward me and that I'd chosen not to attend as a result. According to her, his parents were mortified and demanded the full story. Apparently, his mother called my sister aside during the reception to apologize on her son's behalf and to express how embarrassed she was by his behavior. She'd been raised to believe that family always came first, and she was appalled that her future daughter-in-law's brother had been treated so disrespectfully. My sister said several family members and friends had approached her throughout the evening, asking about me and expressing disappointment that I wasn't there. She realized, she said, how obvious my absence was to everyone who knew us well. The voicemail ended with her saying she understood if I never wanted to speak to her again, but she hoped someday I might be willing to rebuild what we'd lost. She promised that she'd learned from this experience and would never again stand silently while someone she loved was mistreated. It's been a week since the wedding, and I'm still processing everything. I'm not sure if or when I'll be ready to reconnect with my sister. The trust that was broken wasn't just about one incident at an engagement party. It was about fundamental values and priorities that apparently didn't align as well as I'd thought. But I'm not angry anymore. Hurt, yes. Disappointed, absolutely. But not angry. Sometimes people show you who they really are in moments of crisis, and you have to decide whether you can accept that version of them. For now, I'm focusing on building relationships with people who share my values around loyalty and respect. I've reconnected with some old friends who reached out after hearing about the situation through mutual acquaintances. I've started volunteering with a local mentorship program, helping kids who've aged out of foster care navigate young adulthood. My life feels different without my sister in it, but it doesn't feel empty. I'm learning that sometimes cutting people off isn't about punishment or revenge. Sometimes it's about protecting your own peace and refusing to accept treatment that falls below your standards. The cashier's check is still sitting on my kitchen counter, uncashed. I'm not sure what I'll do with it yet. Part of me wants to donate it to a charity that helps siblings who've lost their parents, like we did. Part of me thinks I should return it with a note saying that money was never the real issue. Mostly, I just hope that someday my sister truly understands why her silence that night was more damaging than her fiancé's words. Until then, I'm content knowing I stood up for myself when it mattered, even when it cost me the most important relationship in my life. Some bridges are worth burning if the alternative is accepting disrespect with a smile. I chose my dignity over family harmony, and despite the pain it's caused, I know it was the right choice.